Hey everyone, this is EG7, and today I have some big news from the parent company that owns the studio that develops The Lord of the Rings Online, Inad Global 7, or EG7 for short. They had their investor presentation this year, similar to December of last year, 2020, where they talk about their products, and because of their acquisition of Daybreak Games also last year, this does include LOTRO. So now, very importantly, what is contained in this presentation is not an announcement from the developers, Standing Stone Games, and because of that, I am honestly a little bit skeptical of this info, but we'll save that for later. I will link all the sources in the description, but to get to the juicy details. These start in their product slate for 2022 and beyond slide, which has LOTRO categorized under the medium term. In the LOTRO section, they say Daybreak is investing in a major revamp to upgrade the visuals, modernize the experience, and release on consoles. For LOTRO, this is reported to coincide with Amazon's upcoming Lord of the Rings TV series, which is scheduled for a debut in September of next year, 2022. While this section is explicitly after 2022 in the timeline, it suggests that perhaps in late 2022 some of this is expected to become a reality, but also there may be some more longer-term plans for 2023 and beyond. Next up, the presentation actually basically repeated that, saying large content updates and revamp for LOTRO in the near to long-term pipeline. And throughout the entirety of this presentation, the acting CEO, Ji Ham, talked about the benefit of live service games and that being a large focus of EG7 moving forward. From the business viewpoint, it sounds like this is expected to be a larger portion of their revenue, so of course they want to invest in it. For LOTRO specifically, which is a live service game, he mentioned that the work on LOTRO is a big project, but they expect significant upside. Since LOTRO is an MMO, he also mentioned the thirst for good MMOs, especially with Western MMOs. In particular, the acting CEO referenced New World, and while that has hit some particularly rough patches lately, New World was a crazy big launch still. And to briefly cover how this 2021 presentation we have now differs from last year in 2020, when EG7 acquired Daybreak Games, that one only mentioned the visual and technical updates for LOTRO for PC and next-gen consoles target in 2022. This blurb on LOTRO, it caused rumors of a major graphics overhaul to spread throughout the community, which never actually really was just a true thing. It was a rumor the whole time, but still, this rumor caused a lot of hype surrounding this. Now, the current EG7 presentation capitalized on this hype by this time confirming a major revamp for the explicitly mentioned upgraded visuals, modernized experience, and console release. So, this all sounds like a wonderful confirmation that LOTRO is being heavily invested in with this so-called major revamp. And to find how EG7 intends to accomplish this so we can actually see it in the game, we actually have to go back a couple months ago to EG7's interim report for Q3 of 2021. In this report, there is a section on Piranha, which is a studio developing MechWarrior 5, a game I'm personally not familiar with. But at the end of Piranha's section, the report mentions that as the Piranha team is ramping down work on this MechWarrior 5, the plan is to utilize Piranha's team to staff various key projects for groups such as the Lord of the Rings Online update. And with that, that covers what was in the presentation, both the slides and discussion from Ji Ham, again, the acting CEO of EG7. Again, all this will be linked in the description for you to see yourself. But at this point, I really have this big question of, will any of this actually happen for LOTRO? One reason I am skeptical on this is because this comes from an investor's presentation and not directly from the LOTRO developers at Standing Stone Games. Regarding the graphics update, the producer for LOTRO has said now more than once. They are in fact planning to update the graphics for LOTRO, but it will be done slowly, not only throughout 2022, but also through the next few years with minor improvements over time adding up. And these types of updates we could see include things like the per pixel lighting attenuation from a few months ago earlier this year. To go into more confirmation from the developers of what is coming to LOTRO, there will be regular content updates next year. The Fate of Gundabad expansion will continue to get new instances and a raid early next year. SSG has also said they are planning a really big festival for their 15th anniversary in April next year. That's LOTRO's 15th anniversary, not SSG. And in addition to that, a new player housing region has been confirmed to be coming likely in early 2022 with Harbor Housing. There is also one little bit of acknowledgement the executive producer for LOTRO recently made regarding this major revamp. He commented that they are indeed working on the UI for better 4K support and scalability, which could not only modernize LOTRO for PC, if it's done properly with vectorization of a lot of graphics, it could also make LOTRO much more prepared for a console port. So while the executive producer never went into those details actually, there was the explicit mention of the 2022 graphics update and the necessary work on the UI for that. Now for the server side of things with LOTRO, SSG has confirmed they will be updating these servers to 64-bit, which may be categorized under the umbrella term of like modernizing the game. But outside of all of that, SSG has kept really quiet about 2022 and beyond, and especially in regards to what has been presented by EG7. The most I have heard from SSG directly is just that people at Daybreak and EG7 are excited about working with LOTRO, but of course haven't shared any details beyond that. Every time players ask about LOTRO going to consoles, SSG goes like full no comment mode, neither confirming nor denying anything, and depending on if you consider performance and hardware utilization to fall under the giant umbrella of modernization and LOTRO, there also haven't really been many productive, meaningful comments on that. So why I am initially skeptical on LOTRO actually receiving a major revamp to visuals, modernization, and consoles, this first boils down to a lack of confirmation from the people actually developing the game at SSG. Additionally, since EG7 acquired Daybreak Games, they don't really have any track record to prove they can accomplish such a feat, with MMOs in a similar position to LOTRO, as in they have not actually done this with older MMOs that are generally considered to be outdated, especially in terms of graphics and optimization. And that really brings us to my next region, which is this is just really a huge undertaking to update such an old MMO. SSG has mentioned that there are aspects of the game that were like developed a long time ago by people that no longer work there, and changes to these parts of the games are really hard and or expensive to do. With how old LOTRO is and how long it has been developed, it's just hard for me to believe drastic changes, especially drastic enough to get LOTRO ready for console release, will actually happen in the next couple years. But setting that skepticism aside, this presentation and a small number of recent events may actually support the possibility of all this going through. So to see the other side some, I think the first way to see this possibility is by the wording used in the presentation. A so-called major revamp is subjective. What qualifies as a major revamp? Perhaps what SSG has already announced in terms of smaller graphics updates over time would fulfill the visual part of the update. For modernization, maybe something as minor as the move to 64-bit servers would fulfill that. And these two things topped off with like a UI overhaul for better high resolution and scaling support could satisfy what EG7 is calling a major revamp. But really the toughest sell to me is LOTRO on consoles, but honestly modern day consoles are much closer to PCs than older consoles, especially if we look at the Xbox Series X, which appears surprisingly similar to Windows. A concern some players such as myself have had is LOTRO would need to be like dumbed down in order to work on consoles with all the abilities currently in the game. But if we look at a game like Final Fantasy XIV, that game has shown it is possible to have combat systems like LOTRO and have it work on console. LOTRO even already has many accessibility options that would make gameplay much easier and more fluid on controllers on consoles. And speaking of controllers, modern consoles actually have full support for keyboard and mouse anyway. So while back in the day, Turbine determined a console port for LOTRO to be too costly, it is probably a much easier task nowadays. I believe the biggest hurdle for LOTRO to overcome for a console release are technical barriers. LOTRO is sort of a mess even on Windows. A fresh install of LOTRO often requires the user to go and find and download DirectX runtimes for the game to even boot. The Steam version of the game can also run into odd issues for some users, but that seems to be inconsistent. LOTRO also currently requires an operating system that supports 32-bit even if you can choose the 64-bit client, and that actually excludes operating systems such as the newer Mac's operating system. And the client also does not support multi-threading, which really hurts potential performance on hardware from the past few years. And with modern day hardware, with crazy like consumer CPUs that we have now, it's even worse than that. So even with some of the best hardware currently available, some locations and situations in LOTRO may not consistently run at 60 FPS when you're running with 4K resolution, which happens to be the target performance of modern day consoles. So while consoles seem like a larger possibility than a few years ago, the point is I think LOTRO has some technical hurdles to overcome for a smooth console version that has modern day performance expectations. Although I suppose it's always possible they could release a really poor performing LOTRO on consoles. But anyway, moving on to my overall opinion, while I am skeptical on LOTRO getting a major overhaul in the advertised revamp, there are some reasons to think LOTRO will at least be updated to a more modern standard the next couple years. But that is all I have for this video, and I hope you all enjoyed it and learned something useful. And if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member to support the content. And thanks for watching, everyone.